This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are TNT Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Good afternoon, Tanya.
Hey, Talia.
Hi.
How you doing?
I am splendid. And you?
Healthy. Still. Right?
That's not wood, but close
Good
enough
enough
for me. I have a great episode for today.
Can't wait.
It's interesting.
Interesting. It's not good.
It's not good. It's good, but you know, it's not good.
Right.
As we said before, but it's good.
It's good.
In a not good way. Should I start?
Of course.
All right. In 1973, a 13-year-old girl named Sandra had already experienced her fair share of heartache. Her father, who was a Native American, he had left her and her mother and her 3 brothers when she was really young. Her mother's name was Lolo, by the way.
Lolo?
Lolo, which I love.
I do too.
Lolo.
Lolo.
Lolo was left to struggle to make ends meet for her 4 children. So for years, Sandra lived with her family in South Dakota with no running water, no telephone, and an outhouse. Back in 73, for millennials, we did have toilets. Because I know my kids would be like, well, you didn't have indoor plumbing, did you?
And running water.
And running water. Sandra's grandparents took care of her while her mom went to college. And her mom got a 2-year degree as a nursing assistant and eventually was able to take her kids back. The children were super excited because they all got to live with Lolo again. Lolo met a man and they got married, but this guy, he didn't like her kids.
What?
Why would you marry a guy that doesn't like your kids?
Thank you.
I don't know. So the children all had to go to separate foster families. After about a year, Sandra and her siblings were allowed to move back into her mom's and stepfather's house. That reunion was short-lived because the stepdad, once again, could not handle those children. Sandra and her brothers were sent to a boarding school, specifically for Native Americans on a reservation. Reservations, as you know, have experienced a lot of hardship in the United States. And back in 1973, the one that Sandra was at was particularly like a third world country. It was extremely poor. And most of them, unfortunately, still are. Sandra and her brothers went to this boarding school, but like any school, it ends. So in the summer of 1973, Sandra was once again able to go back home to her mother, Lolo. When she got there, it wasn't very long before Lolo told her children that she got a new job and they were moving to a town called Tea, South Dakota. Tea like you drink tea. The family packed up and they all moved to a small farm that was just outside of a very rural town. Tea, South Dakota is near Sioux Falls. I have been to South Dakota.
I have not.
It is beautiful, but there are not many people that live in South Dakota. It didn't take long for Sandra to make friends. She actually started looking forward to starting 8th grade in the fall. One of Sandra's new best friends, her name was Debbie, and Debbie was 16. So she was 3 years older than Sandra, but again, Sandra lived in a rural area, and Debbie lived just down the road. It was a very convenient friendship. Plus, they really liked each other. One summer day, Debbie called Sandra and asked her if she wanted to go with her to the Starlight Drive-In movie theater in a nearby town. Of course, Sandra said yes, and the two young teens went to the drive-in. While they were there at the concession stand, Sandra met a handsome young boy named Roger. Roger was very friendly. He was popular at school. He was 17 years old. And they spoke for about 15 minutes. They exchanged phone numbers, and the two teens began talking to each other pretty regularly. Sandra, of course, lied to him and said she was 16 because she didn't think he would be into her if he knew she was 13. Roger was described as a quiet guy who was generally interested in what other people had to say. He was really good at listening and seemed to really, really care about people. Everybody at school liked him. He loved music, and he was really into classic cars. Although Sandra and Roger lived in different towns, they talked on the phone all the time, like teenagers do. During the next few months, the two lovebirds were able to go on dates together because Roger had a friend named Stu, and Stu had a van.
Was it a creeper van?
It's a van, and to me, all vans are pretty much creeper vans. Even a minivan can fall in the category of a creeper van. Stu was 18, and he was actually described as another really nice guy, and he would often agree to go pick up Sandra so they could spend time together. On November 16th in 1973, Roger was at school, and he bumped into a friend of his named Mike. Mike was a 15-year-old sophomore. Him and Roger had been friends for years. When they bumped into each other, they started chit-chatting. They can chit-chat. We cannot, but they can chit-chat because they don't have a podcast. Mike was described as a natural athlete. He played on the baseball team and the basketball team. He even set the record for the most push-ups ever at his high school. Anyway, the two guys were talking in the hallway, and they decided to make plans for the weekend. They agreed to go to Gitchie, Manitou State Preserve on Saturday. They wanted to go there and build a fire and play guitar. Do you know anything about Gitchie, Manitou State Preserve?
I do not.
Would you like to know?
Of course.
It is located in the most extreme northwest corner of Iowa and borders the southeast corner of Sioux Falls. It is 91 acres of preserved land where people hike, camp, fish, and enjoy other outdoor activities.
Sounds like someplace I would hate.
It does sound like someplace you would hate because it's not your home. And it's November.
Oh, forget that then.
In
Definitely.
South Dakota. So it's a little bit cold. Anyway, they're teens, and that's where they decided they wanted to go on Saturday. They invited Stu to come, and he agreed that he would pick up everyone in his van and drive there because Stu's the friend with the car. The next day, Saturday, November 17th, Sandra's phone rang around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. It was Roger, and he wanted to know if she wanted to go with Stu and Mike and Stu's younger brother, 14-year-old Dana, to Gitchie, Manitou. He said, hey, we're all going to go out there, chill out, build a fire, play some guitar. Do you want to join us? Of course. She was like, hell yeah, I'll go in a van with a whole bunch of guys to a state park in the woods.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere.
Absolutely. Around 5 p.m., the two brothers, Stu and Dana, went to Mike's house, and they picked up Mike. Mike kissed his mom goodbye, and he hopped into the van with the boys. They then went to Roger's house, and after they got Roger, they drove the 12 miles out of town to Sandra's farm, because again, she lives way out. And then from Sandra's house, it was another 15 miles to the Gitchie Manitou Preserve. While they are driving around in the van, Sandra realizes they are nowhere near the state park, and she starts getting really concerned. Roger reassures her everything is fine. Stu forgot his guitar and just wanted to go back to his house to go get it. Stu did go to his house, and he did come back out of his house with a guitar case. But for some reason, Sandra's gut just told her something is off. Something is not right. But she couldn't figure out what. The 5 teens, Sandra, her boyfriend Roger, Stu and his brother Dana, and Mike, the athlete, then drove to Gitchie, Manitou. And by the time they got there, it was after 9 p.m. The park entrance was very dark. It's a gravel road, and then it's thickly wooded. Although it was November, there were still leaves on the trees. In looking around, they didn't see any other cars parked anywhere. There were no other people around. They pulled up to this covered camp shelter, you know, where you can have picnic tables and there's a little covering and a fire pit. They pulled up around there, and they decided that would be a good place to build a fire. When they all got out of the van and they got to the fire pit, they saw that there were actually hot coals in the fire pit. Someone had to have just recently been there. They were concerned that that person or people might come back, so they decided that wasn't a good place for them to go. So they all hopped back in the van and decided they were going to go someplace closer to the riverbank because there's a river that runs through Gitchie, Manitou. They found a clearing that looked like a good spot to build a fire. Roger and Sandra set out to find some dead wood. When they got back, Stu built the fire, and they all sat around it. Sandra sat on a log next to Roger. She put her head on his shoulder. They were just singing along, having a great time. Then they heard a strange sound. Dana looked at them, and they could tell that Dana had heard it too. Roger turned to Stu and asked him to quit playing guitar and asked everybody to just be quiet for a second. In the silence, they all heard another snap in the woods, and then they could hear the sound of leaves crunching. Sandra, Mike, and Roger stood up, and they just kind of stared. To put everyone at ease, Stu began playing the guitar. After a few songs, everybody's like, oh, must have been nothing.
Maybe it's animals.
That in and of itself would freak me out. Oh,
Maybe it's just a bear.
some animals in the state park. Oh, okay. Stu sat down on the hollow tree while Dana and Mike stood near the fire. Sandra and Roger sat on a different tree. It was completely dark, except for the fire and the perimeter around it. There was no moonlight to even break up the rampant darkness. As often happens when you're chilling out with your teenage friends in the woods playing guitar, someone busted out a doobie.
Of course.
Of course, it's time to smoke a joint. Sandra took a hit of the weed. She hoped that by doing so, it would alleviate the anxiety she was feeling, because she's a little bit nervous in her situation. However, it only made it worse. The fire started dying down, so Stu suggested that he and Dana go find some more wood.
I'd be like, I think it's time for us to go home.
Yeah, right? I am not volunteering to go in the woods. Sandra, Roger, and Mike, while sitting by the smoldering fire, heard more strange sounds when Stu and Dana were gone. Mike even commented, "It sounds like someone wants us to hear them."
Okay, that's creepy.
The 3 kids slowly started to stand, and they heard more cracking sounds. And Mike shouted out, "Stu, Dana, where are you?" And they yelled, "We're over here." But their voices were coming from the opposite direction of the strange noises. The mysterious sounds they were hearing, it sounded almost as if it was circling them. And each time it circled them, it got closer and closer. At one point, Roger spoke up. His voice sounded very alarmed, and he yelled, "Something's going on. There's someone out there." But it got silent after a while, and the teens, they chilled out. Stu started playing the guitar again.
They were all just going to kumbaya out here in the dark, in the wilderness. We're all freaked out, smoking some weed.
Smoking a doobie. By 10:30, the teens had been in Gitchie, Manitou State Park for over an hour when Sandra and Roger both caught something moving in the distance in the trees at the same time. Roger stepped up in front of Sandra and yelled to Stu, "Hey, did you see that?" Mike, Stu, and Dana all turned around really quick, but none of them saw anything. Stu urges Roger, he's like, "Go check it out."
You go look.
And Roger yelled, "Hey!" But there was no response. Once again, the sounds died down and the teens began to relax.
Wouldn't this have spooked you to leave?
Yes, I'd like to believe that.
I'd like to believe it, too.
But then there's a cute boy that I like there.
That's
so I might want
true.
to stay.
That's true.
Back when I was young, I did just about anything to hang out with a cute boy.
I know, we all made poor decisions.
I made poor decisions, okay? When the fire started to die down again, Roger asked Stu to come with him to get more wood. Again, I'm tapping out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're like, okay, this is the second time now.
I'm busy.
The fire's dying out. It's time to go home.
Just as Roger was at the tree line, he saw movement again. And he yelled out, "Who are you? What do you want?" There was a pause of silence, followed by the crunching of leaves. Then, out of the blue, two figures standing on top of a low ledge of rocks about 20 feet from the teens emerged. Now, these rocks, just so everybody knows, are above the teens. So the teens are on the ground. There's trees around them, but there's a rock ledge with trees up on the top of the rock ledge. Two silhouettes of men emerged, and then a third person came up behind the other two men. In their hands were guns.
Oh, great.
Before the teens even had time to register what was happening, a loud sound shattered the silence, followed by a second loud boom. Mike, being the athletic guy, grabbed Sandra. He pulled her into the tree line and hid her with him behind some trees. He ordered her to stay still and to not make a sound. From where they were at, Sandra and Mike could see that there was a tall man with brunette hair, and he was wearing a hat with ear flaps, holding a shotgun. Then another shot fired out, and Sandra could hear Dana, who must have been somewhat near her and Mike, say very softly, "Stu, what happened?" Then Stu yelled out, "I've been shot. They've shot me." Sandra turned to Mike and asked Mike, "What's going on?" And Mike said, "I don't know." Stu, who was several yards away from Sandra, then yelled out, "It hurts. It hurts so bad." But there was nothing Sandra or Mike could do without risking being shot themselves. The three men with the guns then turned their direction from the fire pit area to the tree line where Sandra and Mike were hiding. One of the men yelled, "We're the police. Come out with your hands up." Mike turned and whispered to Sandra. He said, "We need to do what they say."
No!
No,
don't!
He's like, "We don't want to get shot and they're cops." So the two teens put their hands up and they walked into the clearing in front of the men with the guns. Mike, who has balls of steel, by the way, yelled to the men, "Who do you think you are shooting us?" Instead of answering him, one of the men fired a shot and hit Mike with a buckshot.
Oh.
Do you know what a buckshot is?
I do know what a buckshot is.
I didn't know what a buckshot was. And now that I know, I agree with the O. It's awful.
It's pretty vicious.
From what I have learned, a buckshot contains a lot of large pellets that scatter all over after being fired from a gun. It's almost like a bunch of little bullets all at once. I made the mistake of Googling buckshot. Oh, the images are awful. Awful, awful, awful.
They can do quite a bit of damage.
A lot of damage. And is extremely painful. Mike was shot with a number 4 buckshot in the shoulder and the arm, and he fell to the ground. Instinctively, Sandra fell to the ground too, and she laid there and played dead. Mike and Sandra could hear the approaching sound of the men walking, getting closer and closer to them. One of the men kicked Mike so hard in the lower back that Mike started spasming. Then they kicked Sandra, and they laughed at her for pretending to be dead. They made Mike and Sandra both stand up, and in the darkness, Sandra could make out the silhouette of Dana also standing with his hands in the air too. Given the large wound Mike sustained in his shoulder and arm, Sandra was absolutely stunned, but he could even manage to stand up. One of the men began yelling that this was a drug raid. The other man referred to one of the men as the boss. And the boss pointed to a path in the woods and told Dana, Mike, and Sandra to start walking. They walked further and deeper into the forest, which is 91 acres. After a few minutes, Mike asked the men if they could put their arms down. And the boss said, yeah, you can put your arms down. They continued walking. After a few more minutes, Mike asked Sandra if she wouldn't mind helping him walk. So Sandra wrapped her arms around his waist and helped support him so he could continue walking. Dana whispered to Mike, do you really think they're cops? And Mike said he didn't know. Sandra, Mike, and Dana walked with these men, and they walked, and they walked. And eventually they were ordered to finally sit down somewhere in the woods. The boss told them that there was a man just around the corner, so they better not try to run. Sandra found this really confusing because there was no corner. Like, it's just a trail in the woods. Mike was extremely brave during all of this. He tried to determine through conversation with the men if they were really cops. He asked one of them, do you know Mr. Jensen from the police department? And the man said, I don't know Mr. Jensen. The 3 men then walked ahead of Dana, Sandra, and Mike and left them sitting for a few minutes. Mike eventually had to lay down, and while he was laying down, he squeezed Sandra's hand so tightly that it hurt, but she didn't care. She gently rubbed the top of it because she knew he was suffering. Then Mike told Sandra that he couldn't feel or move his arm, so he asked her if she wouldn't mind placing it on his belly for him, which she did. Dana told Mike, just try to rest while we have a chance. They could hear the men from afar whispering, but they couldn't hear what they were saying. After a few minutes, Mike's breath became irregular. Just then, the men came back, and they ordered the 3 teens to all stand up and start walking again. Twice during the walk, Mike asked the men if an ambulance would be coming soon, and the men didn't respond.
That's going to be a no. Poor Mike.
He's just clinging to the hope that they might be police officers. Sandra began to realize that she didn't have much to lose in this situation, so she decided to start asking some questions too. She asked the boss about Roger and where he was taking them. One of the men, who is called Sneaky.
Oh, great.
So we have the boss and Sneaky, told her he was going to take Mike to the prison hospital. He also told all the teens that they could expect to get 5 to 10 years for smoking dope. After walking a bit further, the men ordered Dana, Mike, and Sandra to stop. and they waited for a while. Eventually, a truck approached with its lights on, and the boss called out to the driver, who was lovingly referred to as Hatchet Face.
Oh.
And Hatchet Face stepped out of the vehicle. So we have Sneaky, the boss, and now Hatchet Face.
Imagine Hatchet Face is your nickname.
I bet he was handsome.
I bet he was stunning.
Hatchet Face was one of the original three men. At some point during the walk in the woods, he went his own way, and he returned in this truck. Mike asked if he could sit down, but was told that they will, quote, blow his fucking head off if he tried. The teens knew a police officer wouldn't say that.
Oh, now we're realizing it's not the police?
And Mike asked once again, for the third time, if an ambulance would be coming. This time, the boss assured him that one was on its way. Then the men acted like they were booking the teens. They started frisking them for ID, asking their names, their dates of birth. Sneaky then asked a really weird question. He asked how many girls were with them, which the teens thought was just really odd. In 1973, as you know, there was the hippies out there, and it was very normal for males to have very long hair. And both Dana and Roger had really long hair. So it's safe to assume that in the dark, in the very beginning, Sneaky, Hatchet Face, and the boss probably thought some of those boys were girls. And were sadly disappointed to find out there was only Sandra. Hatchet Face,
that's the best nickname.
Just give me a second with this. Hatchet Face ordered the kids to sit down and stay put. Then Sneaky, the boss, and Hatchet Face went to the truck and spoke some more. Sandra overheard them talking about tying them up and putting them all in the truck. After rummaging through the front of the truck, the boss came back to the teens. He turned to Sandra. He ordered her to put her hands behind her back and told her, I can't find my handcuffs, so I'm going to have to bind your wrists with this wire. And it was a really thin gray wire. The boss told Sandra, if you wiggle a lot, it will cut your skin, which it started to do. Sandra asked him if he would remove the wire because it was hurting her, and he said okay. He then ordered her, and only her, into his truck. He told her he was going to place a bag over her head. She said, why are you going to place a bag over my head? And he told her it was to keep her warm. And she said, I can just put my hood on. No. And he said, okay. And he didn't put the bag over her head. Then the boss told Sandra he was going to do her a favor. He's going to take her out of the state park before the sheriff came so that she wouldn't get in any trouble. He assured her that Roger was hit with a tranquilizer gun and that once the tranquilizer wore off, Roger would be fine. He then drove the truck out of the state park with Sandra in the passenger side. Sandra turned around and she could see that Stu, who was last seen by her yelling, it hurts so bad, was now with Dana and Mike, who were left behind with Sneaky and Hatchet Face. She locked eyes with Dana as the truck slowly drove away, leaving those three boys alone with two crazy men, their arms in the air, standing on a dirt road at the state park. And before I tell you what happens next, I'm going to do a shameless plug. And I am ashamed of myself for doing it now because I strategically placed this.
Talia, I need to know what happens.
Spot. That's why you're going to have to come back after our shameless plug, Tanya.
Fine.
Hey everyone, if you go to our website, tntcrimes.com, you can find full unreleased episodes available for individual purchase. You can also join our membership where you get unlimited access to all of our unreleased episodes and early releases, mini episodes, and so many other awesome things. So go to tntcrimes.com. And thanks again for all your support. Okay.
That wasn't so bad. It was quick.
I actually enjoyed hearing my voice.
I love our shameless plug.
I know, see? More positive now. Hatchet Face went and got Stu's van while Sneaky stood guard of the boys, and he drove it to where the boys were standing. He then flicked on the headlights, and the 3 boys stood in front of those beams of light. They were ordered to get on their knees, and then Sneaky yelled, "Shoot the little hippie first." And a buckshot tore through Dana, slamming him to the ground. Stu froze in fear as he watched his little brother fall to the ground. Then Hatchet Face and Sneaky fired at Stu. Then they fired a shot at Mike. The 2 men fired more and more buckshots at the boys.
Oh.
Just destroying their bodies with bullets. When they were done, Hatchet Face drove off in Stu's van with Sneaky in the passenger side. The 2 men drove to a prearranged abandoned farm in Sioux Falls to meet the boss. The boss, his duty was to dispose of Sandra. Why she wasn't just killed right then and there, I don't know, but that was the boss's job. While the boss is driving with Sandra, he realizes that the truck is almost out of gas. So he pulls into a farmyard that seems familiar to him. Towards the back of the farm, there's a gas pump. He told Sandra that being able to get gas at strategically placed gas pumps throughout the United States was one of the things an undercover police officer, such as himself, has access to.
All right.
He says there's gas pumps all around in weird places, and he just has to leave $10.
That's just so weird.
It's so stupid. So he leaves $10, and he pumps some gas. Then they drive on. He starts talking to Sandra about his undercover business. And he asks Sandra, he says, "Do you promise not to tell anyone what me and my other cohorts did? Because if so, I will make sure you get out of the mess. In addition, though, you have to promise me you'll never smoke weed again." And Sandra's
okay.
Like, yeah, absolutely. He then made her drink some of his Coke because he said that would help her pass a drug test. And that way, it would ensure that she didn't get busted. Sandra asked him, "Where are we going?" And he told her that they had a drug raid to do really quick.
You're going to wait in the car?
Yes, that's exactly it. We're just going to do a quick drug raid, and then I'm going to take you home. You're not going to get busted. They approach an abandoned house, and this is where he says the drugs are stored. As they get to this house, Sandra can see that the windows are sagging, and there's a dilapidated barn that's almost completely fallen down. There's a rusty barbed wire fence that is leaning all around the ground of the house. As they get closer, she can see that there's Hatchet Face and Sneaky there waiting. The 2 men appeared to be very angry at the boss when they saw Sandra. The boss got out of the truck, and Sandra could hear the conversation because they were purposely talking loudly by her. The boss asked Sneaky and Hatchet what happened to the 4 boys in the park after he left. The 2 men laughed and said that after Sandra and the boss left, the tranquilizer wore off on Roger. The boys started to run away. But don't worry, they were able to apprehend them. Then Hatchet Face and the boss started walking. And Sneaky hopped into the car with Sandra. Sneaky made her take her pants off and take her underwear off. He then violently raped her, banging her head against the truck door. When he was finished with her, he didn't even bother to put his pants on. He just got out of the truck. And he left Sandra there, stunned and naked. She heard the men arguing more. She could hear Hatchet Face and Sneaky yelling at the boss, saying how he screwed up. She knew that they were arguing about her. She heard the boss say, I didn't have enough time, I planned on it, I ran out of time. Hatchetface and Sneaky said, let's kill her right here and right now and get this over with. But the boss told them, you need to go get rid of the guns. I'll handle this girl. Sneaky and Hatchetface drove off. Hatchetface actually had to take Sneaky back to jail because Sneaky was out on work release. Sneaky was actually doing time, and he was working really odd hours for a towing company. Because it's a towing company and cars break down all the time, his hours were really flexible. So he was almost able to go in and out of jail whenever he wanted, in essence. But he had to get back to jail. So Hatchetface dropped Sneaky off at jail, and then he disposed of the guns by throwing them in a place called Grass Lake. When the two men drove off, Sandra was left alone in the cab of the truck with the boss. She started crying, and she told the boss that she was a virgin.
Oh.
And he yelled back at her, no, you weren't.
Yeah, how would he know?
Then she told him she was only 13, and he just sat there. He turned to her after a few seconds and said, I want to see how much guts you have. He reached under his seat, and he pulled out the broken handle of an axe. He grabbed a flashlight, and he made Sandra get out of the truck. He walked her over to the abandoned house, and he had her look through the windows. She could hear, scattering of some sort of critters in there. And he said, I want to see if you can handle going inside that house. And she said, hell no, I'm not going in that house. It is creepy, and I absolutely refuse to go in that house. He said, okay, get back in the truck.
What is the purpose of this?
He was going to go in there and club her to death.
Oh.
She got back in the truck. They took off driving. He asked her, where do you live? She said, I'm not going to tell you where I live because I don't want you to hurt my family. And he said, well, I can't take you home if you don't tell me where you live. So she told him where she lived. Then he said some weird thing to her. He said, I need your phone number because next time I'm in this area, I'm going to stop by and I'm going to show you this little black book I have that has all the names of all the people that sell weed in this area. Sandra was extremely confused by this, but thinks that he was trying to convince her that he really was an undercover cop. So she gave him her phone number. Then, to her surprise, he pulled up next to her mailbox and dropped her off at the end of her driveway.
What?
Isn't that insane?
It is insane.
It was about 4:30 or 5 a.m. Sandra ran into her house. She went right to her brother's room. She told her brother the crazy story of the cops and the tranquilizer guns. Her brother told her she really needed to call the police. But all Sandra wanted to do was just sleep for a few minutes. The adrenaline was wearing off and her body was extremely fatigued. A couple hours later, she just instantly woke up. And the first thing she did was call Roger's house. She wanted to talk to Roger. Roger's mom answered and told her that Roger didn't come home last night. Sandra said, do you think that he might be at Stu and Dana's? Roger's mom said that she called over to Stu and Dana's and neither of those boys had came home last night either. Sandra didn't know what to do. She was kind of in a fog as to how to move forward. So she found Debbie her and Debbie decided to hitchhike back to Gitchie, Manitou.
Oh, no.
To see if the teens were still there. While she was walking, she came across a payphone and decided to call Roger's house again. And Roger's brother answered. She told Roger's brother all about what she knew about the 3 cops and the tranquilizer gun and told him that she'd been raped. And Roger's brother came and he picked her up from wherever she was and he took her to the police. When Sandra got to the police department, the police read her rights, they took her mugshot, and they fingerprinted her. This made Roger's brother enraged. He was so angry. He started yelling, "She knows what happened to my brother. She is a victim. How can you guys do this to her?" But the police, after hearing what she had to say, just thought there's no way she wasn't in on it, because there's no way a murderer or murderers would drop her off and leave a living witness.
Why would a 13-year-old girl be in on this?
They thought maybe it was another boyfriend she had that got angry and jealous. So they read her rights, fingerprinted her, and took her mugshots. She sat down with them and wrote up 10 pages describing the events of the night before. When she was done writing up the 10 pages for the police and describing what happened, the officers went to her mom and they said, "She provided us with excellent insight into the murders." That's how Sandra found out that all the boys were dead. She had still believed they were alive.
That it was really just tranquilizer guns. Oh.
Even though she saw Mike shot, the truth couldn't register with her. Unbeknownst to Sandra, earlier that morning, a couple had been test driving a new car when they decided to go to Gitchie State Park. They drove through the gravel entrance, and about 50 yards further up, they saw what they thought was a prank of 3 teens laying on the grass. When the man got out of the car, he saw blood and tissue all over the grass surrounding the boys and called the police. The police began investigating the crime scene. After a few minutes, about 100 yards away from the other boys, they found the body of Roger beneath a drooping branch of a tree near the river. His coat was rolled up in bunches, which was consistent with being dragged. They found Stu's guitar still placed where he had left it against the tree. There was a pool of blood on the grass, and then a trail of blood leading from that pool of blood by the campsite to where the bodies were found. They came to the conclusion that the spot where the blood was, the pool of blood, was from Stu. Stu had been made to get up and walk even though he was severely injured, and that's why there's the trail of blood going to where eventually Stu's body was found. Stu's car was found abandoned later that day in a parking lot in Sioux Falls. An autopsy was conducted on the boys, and it is bad, as you can imagine.
Oh.
It was really, really bad. Roger had multiple wounds to his head, his face, his chest, and his arms. There were 7 exit wounds. His skull was fractured, and his brain was destroyed.
Oh, my God.
Stu had suffered wounds to his upper left side of his chest, his abdomen, his right upper leg, his left hand, and there was also large gaping wounds in the middle of his back and his buttocks. Mike had wounds to the upper left side of his chest, his upper left arm, the left side of his face, his left hand, and his wrist. He was also shot in the back, the butt, and the legs. Dana had wounds to the right side of his chest, his heart, and his back. Sandra was given a pelvic exam. A rape kit was done on her. This, as you can imagine, was extremely traumatizing to her. A lot of people doubted her story, even some of the police, So she was given a lie detector test,
This poor child.
which she passed. Then the police, the next day, brought her back to Gitchie, Manitou, and had her reenact the night's events while they videotaped her. They told her that it was important because if the men were ever caught, they would need it as evidence. So she agreed, and she had to go and relive the events of the night for the police. Because the perpetrators were still at large, for Sandra's own good, they placed her in a juvenile detention center. I mean, Sandra is having just the worst time. She's now in the juvenile home.
With a bunch of child criminals.
But she was such an amazing person. She was able to provide details to the police about who did it. So a sketch artist made some sketches of the three men. What the truck was like, what the abandoned farmhouse was like. She described the place where the boss filled up the gas and gave really detailed information. The police began scouring the countryside, looking for this abandoned farmhouse. They were actually surprised to find out how many abandoned farmhouses there really are out in the country in South Dakota and northern Iowa. 5 days after the murder, on November 22nd, the police received another 911 call. A man reported that he went to his neighbor's house and found his neighbor dead. The police went to this house, and there were some really strange things going on there. The windows were covered with plywood. The yard was overgrown with grass and weeds, and all of the trees had been cut to stumps. It basically looked abandoned. Inside the home, it was cluttered with Coke cans and books. The house smelled awful. As the police walked inside, they saw a corpse laying sprawled out in a large pool of blood next to a shotgun. There were blood smears all over the walls, which indicated that the victim had thrashed around before dying. The neighbor explained to them that the man living there was a hermit, and the neighbor took pity on him, so once a week he would deliver a case of Coke to him. The investigators noticed that there were several dead birds all around the house, too, and there was bird meat rotting on the table, in addition to piles of bird bones. They were starling birds, which are like blackbirds, I guess. There were also 3 rotted teeth with the roots still attached, and a glass of water.
The teeth were in a glass of water.
Yes. And magnets were hung all over the house. And I mean all over the walls. They were covered with magnets. The police were really concerned that there was something going on with somebody in shotguns, because this is a very rural, unpopulated area, and they now have a total of 5 deaths via shotgun in 5 days. After a few days, the investigators were able to determine that this man ate blackbirds and starlings as his primary source of food, and he refused to go to the dentist, preferring to pull his own teeth out with pliers when they rotted.
Oh.
He believed the Germans were going to invade America, so he hung magnets throughout his house to throw off the enemy's plane's radar.
Does it work? What?
I think he was a paranoid schizophrenic.
Probably magnets. I haven't heard that one.
He cut down the trees in his yard so the Germans couldn't hide behind them. They realized that this man had actually attempted to commit suicide, but it didn't go as planned.
So he had shot himself with the shotgun?
Yes. He'd placed the butt of the shotgun on one of the steps, because it was like 3 steps going from the living room to the kitchen. He stood above the barrel, which he placed in his mouth. When he went to pull the trigger, the barrel pulled away, so most of the bullets missed him. Only a few actually hit him, which led him to bleed out slowly.
Oh, that's a terrible way to go.
Needless to say, this was not related to the Gitchie Manitou crimes.
That's insane.
Eventually, 4 funerals were held for the boys. Sandra begged the authorities to please let her attend those funerals. But they denied it. They said it's just not safe because oftentimes perpetrators come to funerals.
Oh, that's true.
She was relentless. Eventually, the police came up with a plan for her to be able to attend the funerals unnoticed and protected by them. There was an overflow room, I guess that's what they call it, an extra room, and they put a curtain up in the overflow room of the funeral home. They brought Sandra in the back way and placed her behind the curtain. Of course, someone spotted her. People started whispering. Then one of the relatives of one of the boys stood up, went over to her, pulled the curtain, and yelled at her to get the hell out of there now. You know more than what you're telling the cops, and I want you the hell out of this funeral home.
This poor girl.
The police had to escort Sandra out of the funeral home. They found her a safe house to stay in so she could be with her mom. It was a rundown trailer out in the country, but at least she could be with her mom instead of in the detention center. As you can imagine, Sandra had nightmares almost every single night for a very long time. A little side note, Sandra never once was offered counseling or therapy.
And she needs it.
During all this, the police continued to drive around the country looking for the specifics that Sandra gave them to look for that farmhouse. But they found nothing. The police decided to bring Sandra with them while they searched the countryside, given the fact that she knows what they're looking for. While they were driving, Sandra was looking out the window, and all of a sudden, she screamed hysterically, "That's him!" A man in a white pickup truck was pulling out of the driveway of an abandoned 2-story white house that matched the description of where Sandra was. The man in the pickup truck was the boss.
Oh.
Tell me that's not some weird coincidence.
That is.
He went back to the scene of the crime, because they always go back to the scene of the crime. And they just coincidentally happened to be there. The cops let him go down the road a little bit. They stopped the car. Sandra got out with one of the other police officers and hid, while the other cop put on his lights and his sirens, and he went after the boss. The boss, surprisingly, his name is not the boss. His name was Alan Fryer. Alan Fryer was 29 years old. He was married. He had a stepdaughter, and he worked as a farmhand. He had 2 brothers, James, a.k.a. Sneaky, and David, a.k.a. Hatchetface. All 3 men were convicted felons. Alan eventually confessed, quote unquote, but his confession was actually about self-defense. He claimed that the boys went after them with guns.
Oh, come on.
Even though they didn't have any guns. Then he blamed his brothers, because he's a good brother. He was like, they did it.
They did do it.
I didn't do it. When David got arrested, instead of facing a trial, and David is Hatchetface. So we'll just call him Hatchetface, okay?
Okay.
When Hatchetface got arrested, he pled guilty to 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. He didn't want to go to trial. But the boss and Sneaky wanted to take it to trial. They remained in the Rock Rapids jail while they awaited trial. Do you know where Rock Rapids is?
No.
Rock Rapids is located in the northern tip of Iowa. And it wasn't what you would describe as a jail that had advanced technology. The sheriff actually lived on site in the jail with his wife and children.
He did?
He did. His wife was known as the jail matron, and she cooked the meals for the inmates.
This is a really small town. I'm taking it.
Like some movie, like some Wild West movie. At some point, the Rock Rapids jail got new locks installed on the jail cells. However, no one noticed that the cell doors weren't bolted down.
Oh, shit.
No one except Alan Fryer, who had his 6th grade education and an IQ of 87.
He outsmarted them all.
He outsmarted them all and managed to escape. And luckily for him, the sheriff left all the keys hanging on the wall near the cell. So he was able to unlock James, a.k.a. Sneaky, and all the doors. And the two of them walked out of the jail in their green jail overalls down the street where they stole a car. Less than a week later, they got caught when Alan accidentally hit someone with the stolen car.
Oops.
The pedestrian lived.
Thank God.
But they got caught. After 2 trials, which lasted almost a year, the men were found guilty of the murders and they were sentenced to life in prison in the state of Iowa. Sandra did her best to put her life back together, but as you can imagine, she struggled for years. People referred to her as the Gitchie Girl, and because there's assholes all over the world, people still whispered about her, wondered her role in the crime.
Because she was lucky enough to live.
Exactly. As I told you, she was never offered any professional counseling. One good thing that did happen to her is Roger's family embraced her. They treated her as if she was one of their own, and she spent countless hours talking with Roger's brother. She would often visit Roger's grave and talk to him and sing there. Eventually, after many, many years, she met and married a really successful businessman. They had 2 sons, and she prospered in the world. She's doing really good.
Oh,
just
good.
so everybody knows.
Oh, I'm so glad.
There was one question that had been gnawing at her for years that she really wanted to know the answer to. Why was her life spared? She decided to visit Alan Fryer, the boss, in the Iowa prison and ask him why. The other 2, Sneaky and Hatchet, refused to talk to her, but Alan agreed. When she got to the prison, she sat face to face with him and asked him, "Why didn't you kill me?" He told her that at the time he had a stepdaughter that was her age, and she reminded him so much of her that he just couldn't kill her. So everybody knows I got all the information on this from the books called Gitchie Girl Uncovered and Gitchie Girl by Phil Hamman and Sandy Hamman. They're really good books. So I recommend everybody go out and purchase them. And I'm getting no money for saying that. And that's the episode for today.
Wow. That was a pisser.
That was a real pisser.
Thanks, Talia.
Like, for some reason, I just find myself fascinated by those scary woods and cabin stories.
Oh my God, I was terrified when you were telling me. Like, seriously, I was having massive anxiety because that is my worst nightmares. Being out in the woods with your friends at a bonfire and then you hear crack, crack, crack. All the leaves and the branches. No thanks.
I'm never going to be able to go out camping again.
First of all, I hate camping.
Right.
So
yeah, I was never going to go camping again anyway.
Yeah.
But now I have a legitimate excuse as to why not
I know,
to.
right?
We have some shout outs.
All right.
Shout out to Allison E.
Hey, Allison.
Donna H.
Hey, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
And I forgot to write down the rest, so we're going to do that next week.
All right.
And just so everybody knows, you can catch some online-only episodes or become a member and get access to them. We have a new one that was just released called The Women in the Barrels.
And that is some crazy-ass story.
Yeah, there's women in barrels. And then there's Mother Teresa.
Oh, Mother Teresa.
And then The Deadly Dentist.
Oh.
Tunnel Vision.
All good episodes.
The worst one, if you want the gruesome scale to be a 10. Kansas City Butcher.
He's a freak.
And by the time I think they hear this, there's actually Killer Fiction.
Oh.
Oh God, I gotta shower just saying those words.
Killer Fiction is
Stop.
I think that one is my number one most disgusting one.
Anyway, thank you everybody Stay safe. Love your families.
Until next time.
Keep your feet on the ground.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.